Hey, this is Andrew Brown from ExamPro, and we're looking at Azure Service Bus. So Azure Service Bus is a fully managed enterprise message broker that allows you to publish and subscribe to topics and queue messages. It can scale with your applications with asynchronous messages and built-in integration with Azure services. So here is an example of Service Bus. And so, the way it works is you have producers, you have consumers. And so producers are sending messages or events into an event bus. The event bus is designed to broker that information, so pass it along to the ones that are subscribed. So these applications which are consuming are subscribed to specific messages, and they pull data to get them into those target end applications. Some things we need to know is you can handle single or batch messaging, load balancing messages, topic subscriptions, manage sessions, and transactions with guarantees that it compiles with industry standards and protocols like the Advanced Message Queuing Protocol, so AMQP, Java Message Services, so JMS, and other protocols there. So they're just saying, like, yeah, if you're already using very particular protocols, you can integrate with those. Let's talk about key concepts for Service Bus. So the idea is that you have a namespace which works like a server with end queues and topics. You have queues which contain the messages. You have senders who send the messages, receivers who receive the messages, topic, which is a queue with multiple receivers that work like a queue. A subscription is a receiver in a topic. A batch is a group of messages. A safe batch validates if each message can be included in the batch. Sessions allow you to use first in, first out, and group your messages in a queue. Peak returns a message to the queue without removing it. Dead letter queue, a queue for messages that were unable to be delivered through the normal queue. Peak and lock, so this retrieves a message from the queue without removing it and locks it so other receivers cannot receive it. Receive and delete, so receives and deletes messages from the queue. Auto delete on idle, so sets a time span to delete the queue if not used. Duplicate deletion detection history, so checks if the message was not sent earlier before sending it a message. So there's a lot of stuff here, but don't worry, we're going to kind of cover it, the most important stuff here in the upcoming slides and in the follow along, okay? Let us talk about namespaces for Azure Service Bus. So simply put, namespace is a container for all messaging components, so queues and topics. But there's, a few options here. I don't have a visual, but there's some text we have to go through here to understand some of the things that namespaces do. So a single namespace can contain multiple queues and topics, and namespaces are often used as application containers. So a Service Bus namespace is a capacity slice of a large cluster made up of a dozen of all active virtual machines that you control. It may optionally span 3 AZs or availability zones in Azure. You get all of the benefits of running the message broker at massive scale in terms of availability and robustness. A service bus is serverless messaging, so you don't need to worry about the underlying complexity, which is kind of interesting because they're mentioning about spanning across availability zones and virtual machines, but it's just a component that's, you don't have to worry about the management of it, but you do need to know a little bit about how it works underneath. But there you go. So there's 2 types of messaging systems in Azure Service Bus. Why they didn't make these 2 separate services, I have no idea. But one is for messaging and one is for pub sub. And the one that is for messaging is called queues. So queues are used to send and receive messages. Messages are stored in queues until the receiving application is ready to accept and process them. Messages in queues are ordered and timestamped on arrival. Once accepted by the broker, the message is always held durably in triple redundant storage across multiple AZs if its namespace is zone enabled. So if you don't enable zone enabled at the namespace level, you're not going to get that kind of durability or redundancy. Service Bus never leaves messages in memory or volatile storage after they've been reported to the client as accepted. And messages are delivered in pull mode, only delivering messages when requested. That's the key difference between a queue and pub sub. Queue, the receiver, the application has to pull, say, hey, are there any messages in the queue? And that's how they get them. In a pub sub model, they just get it sent to them like a subscription, like a newsletter subscription to your door. Let's take a look at the queue configuration itself. So you can see we can set the max delivery count, things like that, the queue size. Important things to note is the TTL, so how long a message will stay in the queue before it's removed from the queue or moved to dead letter queue. You can enable dead lettering down below. You can enable partitioning here. You can set the lock duration. Very similar to what we'll see for PubSub, I think at the subscription level, but there you go. So topics can be used to send and receive messages. And the idea here is you have a queue, which is often used to facilitate point-to-point communication. And topics are useful in publish to subscribe, so one-to-many communication. So if you want one-to-one communication, you use queues. If you want PubSub, then you use topics. And both these options are available for Azure Service Bus. So topics are not available at the basic pricing tier. You need to have standard or premium. So if you're trying to find that option for PubSub, that's where we're going to have it. And remember that we said that queues use a pull model. Well, topics use a push model. So you don't have to request it, just gets pushed out to you because they're subscribed to it, like having a newsletter delivered to your door. So multiple independent subscriptions can be attached to a topic and work in the same way as queues from the receiver's side. A subscriber to a topic can receive a copy of each message sent to that topic. Subscriptions are named as entities. And so here's an example of sender and receiver. You can define rules on a subscription. A subscription rule has a filter that specifies a condition for a message to be copied into the subscription, as well as an optional action that modifies message metadata. So let's take a look at what the form is for topics. So the idea is you name your topic. You have a max size between 1 to 5 gigabytes. You can have a time to live. So after that period of time, those messages or event data just goes poof. So it's just gone. You can avoid duplication by turning on enable duplication or duplicate detection. You can enable partitioning, and partitioning is intended for scale. So if you have a lot of messages, you might need to partition based on your volume, okay? Let's take a quick look at subscriptions for Azure Service Bus. So I just pulled up the form here because a subscription is just the application that is receiving that information. So you just define one in the interface here, but there are some values that I want to point out, such as max delivery count, which can be between 1 to 2,000. This manage sessions. So with sessions enabled, a subscription can guarantee first in, first out. So FIFO, delivery of messages. So that is where that gets turned on. You can also enable dead lettering here, and you can have a lock duration and adjust that there, which I didn't highlight here, but it's here, there. But we will see these things a little bit closer when we do the follow-alongs. But yeah, a subscription is, an application that is receiving information, getting pushed information to it that it will use, okay? Let us explore the pricing for Azure Service Bus. So they have 3 different pricing tiers: basic, standard, and premium. The more expensive tiers provide more functionality, which I would hope that would always be the case for most services. But on the right-hand side, we have our available pricing, and you can see it's based on a metric, so like MUs per month and things like that, or operations per month. And so here is the chart. So let's take a look at what the differences are. So I highlighted topics in yellow to show you that it is not basic. It's not in the basic tier. You have to have standard in order to utilize that. And for your purposes as a person learning Azure Service Bus, you absolutely need to give topics and queues a go, because queues is the classic messaging model and topics is PubSub. And the only way you're going to do that is by using standard, which we will do in the follow-alongs. But notice in basic, we don't get topics, transactions, deduping, sessions, forward to, send via, no resource isolation, geo disaster recovery, Java messaging support, AZ support. And then some of those aren't supported in standard. But then in premium, we get basically everything. And then notice like the big bump in terms of the message size between basic, standard, and premium. So again, the thing I really want you to remember is that in basic, there are no topics, okay? All right, let's take a look here at dead letter queue. This is just a general concept that is common for messaging PubSub systems and is enabled in Azure Service Bus for both queues and PubSub. But a dead letter queue is a service implementation to store messages that fail to deliver And common reasons for failed messages would be things like message that is sent to a queue that does not exist, the queue length limit is exceeded, the message length limit is exceeded, the message is rejected by another queue exchange, the message reaches a threshold read counter number because it's not consumed. Sometimes this is called a blackout queue or backout queue, sorry. The message expires due to per message TTL, so time to live. The message is not processed successfully. So dead letter queues hold messages that have failed to deliver. A dead letter queue could be used for things like monitoring failed attempts, requesting requeuing failed attempts, so try it again, or trigger a follow-up action, so maybe a remediation or a response. So very useful feature, but there you go. Let us talk about Azure Service Bus command CLI or CLI commands, because if you are doing the AZ204, the developer, it's very important to know these commands because they may ask you them. So here I have a bunch of example commands. So just quickly looking at this here, we have creating a resource group, creating a service bus namespace, a queue, an authorization rule. And so it's pretty straightforward, you know, AZ, service bus, etc. Let's take a look at some commands we should know, or subcommands, I should say. So when we say command, the command is service bus, and the subcommand is what follows that. So we have ones for geo recovery alias. So we want to set the geo recovery for it. We don't have an example here on the right-hand side. For migrations, for namespace, for queue, for topic. And so on the right-hand side there, we have one for namespace. We have one for creating a queue. But you'll notice here that we don't have anything that kind of manipulates or adds messages to queues. So the Azure Service Bus does not have CLI commands to send messages to the queue or topic, unlike Azure Storage Queue, which I found out, which was kind of interesting. So to send messages to the queue, you need to use an SDK like Node.js, so you'd install it, and then you'd have to write some code. And we do that in the follow-along. But I just want you to remember that Azure Service Bus, you cannot send messages to the queue or topics via the CLI. And, you know, that kind of sucks because, you know, if you want to do some easy test, it's unfortunate that functionality is not there. But anyway, that's the difference between that and Azure Storage Queue. So there you go. And we are going to take a look at Service Bus. So what I want you to do is type in Service Bus at the top here. What's interesting is that this is the old icon. They have a new icon. So just realize that there's some inconsistencies there, and that's not my fault, that's Azure's fault. But the first thing we need to do is create a namespace, because a service bus is kind of like, you know, storage account where you can have a variety of different kinds of storages. Well, you can have more than one type of messaging system. And so we have our traditional one, like event messaging, similar to Storage Queue, but with first in, first out functionality. And we have pub sub via topics. So what you'll do is create a new service bus namespace, and I'm going to create a new resource group and call this the AZ204 service bus, and we'll say queue, because we're going to do a queue and then we're going to do a topic separately. And for this, I'm going to call the namespace service bus queue to keep it simple. We'll let it launch wherever it wants to launch, and notice there are multiple pricing tiers. Depending on the tier affects the functionality. So if we do basic, we're only going to have access to queue. We're not going to have access to topics. And so this is totally safe and fine to do. Like even if we did premium, it's fine because it's based on your consumption. It's not based on, you know, you just holding around. So we'll get the basic one here and we'll go to networking. I don't think there's anything interesting there. We'll go ahead and review and create, and we'll let that create. Click create again. And it's deploying. As that is deploying, which will not take too long, what I've done is set up a private repository here. You'll probably see me use this throughout the course. It's literally an empty repository because I already have the code done. I've been doing the follow-alongs and documenting them here in the free Azure Developer Associate. But when you're doing follow-alongs with me, you should do them from scratch. And then if you need to, you can reference the stuff here. So I have this separate repository. I have a Git pod account, which has a free tier. You can totally do this in your own Visual Studio Code on your local machine. The reason I'm doing a Git pod is because I always want to show you how to set up the CLI and those other tools. And when you launch Git pod, it gives you a blank environment. So I'm just going to launch that up there. As that's going, we'll go back here and take a look and see if this is ready. Just hit refresh here. It is still going. But we already have our environment. And while that is going in the background, I want to go install the Azure CLI. So we don't even have a single file here. I'm just going to say readme.md so I can see what is going on here. Maybe we'll just dump things in here as we go. I'm going to go get the Azure CLI Linux, because this is running Linux Ubuntu here. So something you should always check is like, what Linux version am I running? If you're on Windows, of course, this is going to be different. But even Windows, using the Windows subsystem Linux, is using Ubuntu as well. So what I'll do here, I'll go to the first link. Nope, that's not the one I want. Maybe the second one. There's usually like a command here I can run. Which Linux version am I running? Let's try this one here. It's usually like, so maybe it's this here, cat proc version. It really does vary based on what you're using. And so here I'm going to go File, Terminal, New Terminal. We'll paste that in there, hit Enter. And so here it says Linux 5.13, Ubuntu 11, 18. So I know that this is Ubuntu. Yeah, I don't really like that one there. Let's try this instead, because this just doesn't read very well. There we go. We're running Ubuntu 20.04. I already knew that, but I just wanted to double check. And the reason that matters is that when you're installing the CLI, it might matter what version you're using. So we're going to go here, and I'm going to go to Linux, and the instructions might vary. This one says 16, 18, 20, so they're all the same here, and we have this one-liner here that we'll install. And what I'll do here is drop it in here and hit Enter. I'm not sure if this font is too small, so while that's going, I'm going to see if I can bump up our font here. I'm looking for the terminal font size here. Terminal. Let's just say 20 here. There we go. And so the Azure CLI should be installed, so I'll just type in clear. So let's say Azure or AZ to run it. Looks good to me. So we'll type in Azure login. I don't want to log in with, that way I want to log in with device. So we'll do AZ login device, because if you're on your regular computer, you can just click a button and go to the browser, but I'm not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to have to do a device login. Device. Well, I'll have to do it the wrong way first to do it the right way. So hit Enter, because the problem is if I go here, it's going to go to localhost because it's trying to launch in my local machine. So it does that, and that's no good. And so here it says do the AZ login use device code. Okay, so that's the one I really wanted to use. So -- use device code, Enter. And that will give us a code. So what we do is we will need this link here. So I'll have to expand that to here. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab that code. Continue. And so now I go back. This will authenticate. It'll just take a second here. Close the tab here. There we go. Maybe I had to close the tab. And so now I'm authenticated, so I should be able to do whatever I want. What I need to do next is create ourselves a message queue. So we'll go to the resource here. And notice here in entities, it only says queue. Now, if we had, other than the basic, the standard plan, then we would see topics here. We'll go click into queue, click create a new queue. I'm going to call it my queue. We have some options here. The queue size can go up to 5 gigabytes. The max delivery count. So this is the maximum deliveries. Time to live, that is how long they live in the queue before they are dropped out or they are dropped into a dead letter a system there. We have lock duration, so the amount of time a message is locked for other receivers. You can enable partitioning. That's pretty complicated, but we'll go ahead and create our queue. And so this should be pretty darn quick. There is our queue. We'll click into it. And you'll notice that there isn't really a way to view messages. There's not a way to add messages. Here we have the Service Bus Explorer, which I guess technically you can send and receive here. I had not noticed this before, at least it was not working for me. So I suppose we could send a message here saying like, hello world. This literally wasn't here last time I checked here. And we can go ahead and just hit send. Okay, and notice here it says there's one active message and we can receive it. Say yes. And so it says it received the message. It's not showing us the answer. So I guess there kind of is something here. I guess they're still working on it, but mostly what we're going to have to do is do things programmatically. So that is why we have this account. So what I want you to do is open a new tab here, and we're going to type in Azure Service Bus documentation, because we're going to grab some code there, modify it, make it our own, so it's a bit easier to work with. So here I'm in the service bus. We'll go to tutorials. I'm not sure if this one is the right one. Azure Service Bus Documentation Queue. It's the same thing here, but this doesn't look right. What is Service Bus? I mean, it is the right page, but it had a couple tutorials here that I had here. So we'll type in like Azure Service Bus tutorial topics. Sometimes things aren't where you think they're supposed to be. Okay, we'll type in Service Bus. Seems like the same page again. It was quick starts, sorry. So we have tutorials here, and then we have quick starts. So under the quick starts, this is where I was finding the example code that I thought was okay. Notice that we could do everything via the CLI. That is not that fun. But I mean, this only does the creation of it, doesn't necessarily do sending and receiving messages. Notice that we only can use code. So we'll use JavaScript because I think that will be the easiest to use. So I already have Node. Node comes pre-installed on Gitpod. You'll have to figure that out for yourself on your own machine. Or you can just use Gitpod as well, because it does have a generous free tier. What I'll do is go ahead and paste on in this command. It doesn't seem to want to paste today, so I'll hit copy. And then we'll go back here and go right-click, enter, paste, hit enter. And so what that will do is install that library. If you're not very familiar with Node.js, package.json is the package manager, and this is showing that this requirement is there. I want to install one other thing called .env. This will make our lives a lot easier for Node. It comes for different things, but I just want it for JavaScript here. So then we'll do npm install .env-save. That's just a safe way for us to pass along our environment variables. And so now both of these are installed. So what we'll do is we'll go back over to this code and we'll scroll on down, and they have one called send and they have one called receive. So what I'll do is create myself a couple files here. So we'll have send.js and we'll have receive.js. And then what we'll do is go ahead and copy, this is the send code. So we'll put this in the send.js file. And then down below, we have the receive code. And we will paste that on in there. So I'll just make this bigger and we'll take a quick look here at what it's doing. So what this does is it imports the SDK for Service Bus. We need to set a connection string. We need to set the queue name. Here is a bunch of messages that we are going to be passing along. Here we establish a Service Bus client. Very common in all SDKs to set up a client first. Then we are creating a sender. And then here we are doing create batch messages. So it's a way of sending messages in batch very efficiently. So we have a for loop here. And so it says there's a batch. And then it says try to add the message to the batch. If it's not, wait until it's ready. Then send the message. Okay, so pretty straightforward for that code. Receive is going to be similar. So connection string, queue name, create that client, create a receiver. And then from there, we will set up a handler for the receiver, an error, and so then we'll subscribe, and we will listen for the message and handler. So even though we are doing queues, it's called a subscription still, so just don't get too mixed up with that. what I want to do is just make sure that we're passing our environment variables in safely, our configuration. So this is pretty standard or good best practices when working with any language. But the idea is you don't want to hard code your values. So I'm going to do process env, and we'll do connection string here. And then we'll do process env q name. This is the way you grab environment variables in JavaScript for every language. It's a little bit different. Okay. And I believe these are the same, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab that there like this. And I'll paste that on in here. And I want to load an environment variable, so I'll make a new file here called .env. This is all part of that env dot thing that we're looking at, env dot. I'm just pulling that up again here, or .env. You gotta get the right one. Because we need this line here, require .env config. That will load the environment variables. It'll load it from that env file. So we will go above here and hit paste. And then we'll go to the receive here and do this as well. And in here, we need to define these. So I'm just going to copy this so I don't have to type it out by hand. We will paste that on in here. And so I just need the queue name. And connection string, we'll just say equals and then equals. So our queue was called my queue. And then we need to go grab the connection string. So I'm just thinking here, this is probably, yeah, it's at the namespace level. And we'll go to shared access policies. Notice it's called shared access policies. Remember when we were doing the storage key, it was called key access. So it's totally different interface. This is what I'm talking about where Azure is inconsistent. We're clicking on the root managed shared access key. Probably could create your own so it doesn't have full privileges, but for this purpose, we're just going to use this one. On the left-hand side, we have a primary and secondary. We're going to use the primary one. And we will go back here and we will paste on that value in. So I'll paste that in there. Notice we don't have to do double quotations here. It should already escape in double quotations, but when we were doing the CLI, when we did in the storage accounts, that wasn't something that we could do. So we have these two values here, so they should get loaded when we use them. And this should all be good. So we'll type in node send.js and hopefully it just works. Fingers crossed. And so it sent a batch of messages to the queue. So we'll go back over to our queue here and see if we can see anything. And we'll click into here. I'm just trying to see. So there's 10 active messages that are here right now. And so what we'll do is we'll receive all those messages. So we'll go up and hit node receive.js. And so this code is now receiving those messages from the service bus queue. And we're just going to wait here because it takes time for whatever reason to finish here, but we'll give it a little bit of time here to figure out that it's done. Still waiting. There we go. And so that's all there really is to it. So that is queue, and we will do this again, but next time with topics. So what I want you to do is make your way over back to your resource groups. We'll find the one that we just created, which was this one here, AZ 204 service bus queue. We'll delete this service group. Hit delete, delete, and there you go. And as always, double check to make sure that you've for sure deleted that stuff. And that's it for Service Bus Queue.
Hey, this is Brian from ExamPro. Be sure to check out exampro.co for more flashcards, quizzes, and videos. And also don't forget to like and subscribe. We really appreciate it, and we release new content all the time.